A Barron Trump story in the making caught the eye of wildly onlooking cits when a homeless man suddenly asked to solicit him for one mere dollar. The outcome that resulted was nothing short of dystopian, which abruptly altered the very essence of America. A single act of generosity rapidly escalated beyond control, fueling a national movement where lives were changed and families were reunited. To put it mildly, the city buzzed with energy. Cars were honking, and people were weaving through the streets like a dancer's rhythmic footwork, adding finesse to the music. The drone of people talking topped the cake. Leonard, dressed in ripped clothes that struggled to protect his body from the brutal winter, sat next to a sign that read, "God bless, anything works." Cleveland, Ohio, on the intersection of Broad Street and 17th Avenue, was the next location where the man decided to make everyone depressed. With a thick layer of clothing, his body shivered, and he grimly put his beanie on. At the age of 42, Leonard has been living on the streets for the past year in hopes an individual passes by and shows even an ounce of compassion. Sadly, he had witnessed several unfortunate events that led him without having to live on the streets. Shifting the sign beside him, Leonard sighed. There was a rare possibility that people may actually stop and take notice. But knowing humanity, he was completely stripped of any hope. He sensed that there was something peculiar and out of the ordinary. Him noticing white sneakers set at a distance effortlessly caught his attention, took a step toward the sneakers and noticed how expensive they looked. Taking a better look at the sneakers, it was apparent that those shoes required people with affluence to own. Leonard leaned over and noticed a teenager standing stationary in the distance. The teenager was slender and seemed to be quite fashionable. The boy was elegantly dressed in a suave jacket, with his hands comfortably placed within the pockets. Sitting in the car, Leonard squinted his eyes from the blinding light and took a good look at the boy. The boy was standing still at the corner of the road, glued to his phone. All of his attention was fixated on the device, completely ignoring the people around him. The people in the vicinity began to murmur and gossip amongst themselves in a low voice. Some of the individuals even lifted their cell phones to capture a few candid pictures. With no intention of addressing the boy, Leonard stood silent. While he does prefer eye contact, today was the exception, which made him even more confused. The boy's apathy towards his environment is what bewildered him the most. In a city that never sleeps, feeling calm was out of place. Leonard took a moment, gathering himself, preparing to utter a few words. "Hey, young man, do you believe me when I say this? Could you give me $1?" The boy, who now seemed blank at the sudden interaction, slowly turned towards Leonard. His expression could be characterized as not decipherable at all. For an instant, the world around stopped at a standstill. Leonard readied himself for no. He had grown accustomed to it. But what happened next was absurd in every fashion possible. "Why do you require it?" the boy queried in a soft but commanding voice. Leonard's attention was stolen by the question. His inquiry was not offensive or cut down, but there was more to it. Seems like he was curious about it. Leonard's throat became dry and constricted. "Well, I need coffee, perhaps a sandwich too if I am lucky." Leonard was in fact deep in thought. "I'm not sure how I feel with being questioned." There was no anger to be found in the boy's words, just pure curiosity. The boy moved further towards the man. His phone was now carelessly put away into his pocket. All the people could see his face becoming pale as he felt the glares. It was as though people were judging him silently, wondering why this child would waste his time on a man like this. He wanted to withdraw inside of himself, to escape the traumatic feelings of embarrassment, but the boy's gaze kept him there. "What is your name?" the boy inquired again. Microscopically, Leonard replied, "Well, I'm Leonard." The boy nodded and scrunched his brow, as though he was working through something movement that stretched well beyond the present time. "I'm Barron," he said plainly. For there was no pride, inflexible self-perception, that dynamic, which Marquis made, was unprecedented. Only unquestionable earnestness. The city's hum surfaced once again. Although there was something that had changed within that exchange. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, as if the strange stillness was an indication that something spectacular was right around the corner. Leonard shifted his weight uncomfortably on the frozen asphalt, unsure how to make sense of everything. Barron's aura was very much different from everything else that he was used to. To what extent did his uncle speak? Barron was glaring at Leonard with a gaze that was etched in irritation. Why are you looking at me like that? Leonard was completely puzzled with the question and had sweaty palms while feeling helpless. Barron, did you just blush? Leonard smirked and felt satisfied, caging Barron's curiosity, finding some weird joy. Barron began tapping his foot. Concealed within poised irritation, he did not know how to respond to the question bluntly. Leonard's jaw tightened and shook his head. Don't have much of that anymore, he said. My folks passed years ago. My brother, well, we haven't talked in ages, he smirked in bitterness. Not much left to lose when you've already lost it all. For a moment, Barron was quiet, as if contemplating Leonard's words. Then he reached into his pocket without breaking eye contact. Leonard's pulse quickened. He had asked for $1, just one, but Barron's movements suggested something different. When his hand emerged, he wasn't holding a single bill, but rather a crisp $100 note instead. The sight made Leonard blink in disbelief. Here, Barron said, extending the bill toward him. This should cover more than coffee. Tass stunned, Leonard staring at the money in amazement. For a moment, he couldn't move. It wasn't just the amount, but the gesture itself. Are you serious? Leonard finally managed to ask, his voice cracking. Why would you do that? Barron shrugged lightly. Because I can. The simplicity of his answer left Leonard speechless. But listen, he added, his voice quieter. This isn't just about the money. I wish for you to commit to something for me. What is it? Asked Leonard, gripping the bill like it might disappear. Barron's expression softened, but his eyes grew darker. If I assist you today, you shall have to help yourself tomorrow. Deal. Leonard could feel himself choking on his own breath. The phrase landed more heavily than he anticipated, after what felt like an eternity. Someone wasn't just dangling an opportunity in front of me. They were daring him to try and clamber out of the pit he had sunk into. With even more fury than before, Leonard shook his head. Good, Barron said, after gently plopping down beside me. He checked his surroundings and how many people had began to converge. His no longer attribute was tense, as he saw people's fingers moving behind the lenses of the cameras placed in front of their faces. Leonard's cheeks were entirely blossomed red. Not knowing whether to be surprised, feel free to believe he was trying to be grateful or embarrassed. I feel like I should be both. Barron dug into his pocket again, removing a pocket notepad and a pen, writing something down quickly. He ripped the paper in half and gave it to Leonard. Remember to attend this address first thing tomorrow. These people will assist foster you. You're Barron's child now. As Barron spoke, I shook the now he walked towards me. The note trembled within Leonard's hands. It was he overheard the credence of the not where the clue was leading, but rather reaching, a local shelter, and somewhere resource center, but had proved to be either too proud or too ashamed to go there. I will make certain they are ready for you. Barron added his voice and did not waver. There was a change in the atmosphere around them while Leonard gripped the paper and the cash. It wasn't only generosity, it was expectation, a glimmering, flickering spark in a long, dark world. And for some reason, Leonard was certain this was only the beginning. Leonard sat there, eyes glued to the note and the bill, as if intrigued by a visual spectacle. With the note and the bill, the only things he possessed in his grasp, felt to him unaccustomed hope as well as disbelief battled within his confused head, which spun. Barron didn't depart instantly. He was watching Leonard instead. Standing there felt remarkably unsettling. There was no doubt that he was not simply giving money. He was prepared for some kind of action, and there was something he was expecting from it. An acceptance or a vow, perhaps. An unkept promise. Leonard coughed. His voice trembled. Why? Why do you even care? You don't know anything about me. Barron looked at him with his head tilted slightly. A very soft smile formed on his lips. Because in every life exists a tale, Leonard. It's just that in your case it has not yet surfaced. He looked around at the people who slowly began to come towards them. Honestly, if there's a way for me to provide aid, then why should I not take it? Leonard felt a mixture of confusion and astonishment. He knew he had come across enough empty promises in his life, mostly looking for something better. But he was never able to believe Barron's promises. It always felt as if he was telling the truth. But still, something tells me you're lying. You owe me nothing. Leonard replied, you might want to consider that your lie has been figured out, but I do not have to play along. I've spent enough years on the streets for my guess to be correct. All I have to say is, people are selfish. People do not just stop to lend a helping hand unless there is something of equal value in it for them. Barron moved to sit closer. Now we are eye level. Tell me what you think. I don't plan on asking anything in return, but I do firmly believe that bystanders, even intelligent people, are foolish enough to think that everything they do will have no consequences. That's not the way society works, and everyone knows it. He waved his hand towards the gathered people and added, that place, they have resources, employment opportunities, and psychotherapy. If I do not state that you should meet them, all I'm asking is for you to simply refuse. Never accept any other offer. Leonard felt a lump forming on his throat, making it harder to swallow. He looked again at the note. This time, he bothered to pay attention to the address that was written in an organized manner. He wanted to believe this was true, but years of disappointment had stood him up. And what if I fail to achieve it? What if I make a mess out of it? Barron offered a slight smile and shook his head slowly. Everyone messes up, Leonard, but surrendering, that's the only option in which you are defeated. While he did not elaborate, his comments were quite straightforward. Leonard had not planned on any, for the stillness of the city faded for a moment, and the only thing that soothed his ears was the calm certainty in the boy's words. The throng around them had become more dense, and cameras were now freely directed towards them. Somebody whispered as that Barron Trump. Leonard anxiously turned to the growing interest towards him. He was not accustomed to this sort of attention, and being the focus of so many people's gaze was overwhelming. Barron seemed to be chilled out. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the heat. His cold expression completely opposite from Leonard's discomfort. Do not pay attention to them, he said gently, as though he was in sync with Leonard's thoughts. You and I are what matters. No one else is in the picture at the moment. Leonard surprisingly felt very different than he usually does. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel like he was part of the scenery. Somebody noticed him, actually spotted him, and cared enough to lend him an ear. Okay, he said. At last he appeared calm. I'll go. I will come. Barron softened his expression, turned into a fully genuine smile. That's all I needed to hear, brushing off his knees, and then standing up while scanning the audience. And Leonard, he added his voice now, amplifying it as if he was talking to a wide audience. Remember that Leonard blinked astonished. With thankfulness and shyness, he wanted to express something anyway, but the words escaped instead. He only nodded thankfully, gripping the note in his palm as if it was a raft. As Barron was departing, the crowd created space for him. Their voices are becoming louder. Leonard saw him vanish into the town, his silhouette merging into the flow of people. For the first time in years, Leonard sensed a spark of anything. He figured he was out of hope, and when he glanced at the note again, he understood. As for me, it is the initial move towards regaining control over his life. The following day, Leonard was right outside the place Barron gave him by phone. It was modest, one-story high brick construction on the more sleepy area of Cleveland. Its entrance marked with a simple sign. A small stream of people filtered in and out, some carrying grocery bags while others looking as uncertain as Leonard felt. The note was still tucked safely in his jacket, his pocket, reminding him that this was not a dream. The $100 bill was still uniformed. Part of him wanted to hold on to the generosity to prove that yesterday had really happened. But part of clutched the note. The aspect of him that the Baron's words had touched spoke to him that it was more than money. It was the opportunity for new beginnings. Leonard stepped in the building, taking a deep breath. The warmth of the building got to him immediately, which was so different from the harsh cold outside. The receptionist, a woman with a kind look to her face, who appeared to be in her middle ages, welcomed him with a smile. Putting the note on the counter, Leonard hesitated. Barron sent me. He said I should come here. First, she had glanced at the note. A knowing smile spread across her face. Ah, you must be Leonard. We have been expecting you. Let's get you started, she said, following him. The next few hours passed in a blur, the overhanging meeting with a caseworker who one after another heard his story, judging him with every word. She set out a plan which would get him back on his feet. They set him up with a temporary bed in their shelter and even connected him with a job training program, arranged for a doctor's appointment to tackle his health issues. Overwhelmingly, but for the first time in years, Leonard felt as if the pieces of his life were being picked up and meticulously put together. Later that evening, as he sat on the edge of his bed in the shelter, Leonard pondered the last 24 hours and the events that had crystallized in his consciousness, which included the kindness of a stranger, the offer of help, and the simple act of being seen. Everything felt surreal to him. He reminisced about Barron's words regarding the promise he had made to himself. It wasn't going to be simple, but for the first time, Leonard was filled with hope that it was achievable. Meanwhile, outside the shelter, Barron's actions had set off a chain reaction far beyond what either of them could have thought. In a video of their interaction from a bystander's perspective went viral within the hour. It spread across social media with headlines that extolled the unexpected virtue that the young Trump heir had shown. The footage displayed Barron kneeling beside Leonard, handing him money, and speaking words of encouragement that resonated with millions. Some people thought it was a cheap marketing move, while others staunchly believed that it was an everyone's display of compassion from someone in power to an ordinary person. Regardless of the discussions, what was visible was undebatable. The essence was unfiltered and strongly emotive in the video. Everyone saw, everyone reached out to. Hope Outreach Resource Center was prepared to assist with donations. Barron's actions motivated him. Little did Leonard know that his story was a part of a geopolitical narrative. He was too occupied concentrating on everything ahead, which included his first counseling session, submitting to jobs, and relearning how to trust himself. As Leonard slept that night, the burdens from the year seemed slightly reduced out there in the world. Some young man years old who assisted him was achieving great things, but focusing on the project at hand for Leonard was uncomplicated in his words and promise, focusing on the simple task of completing one day at a time. By the end of the week, many people, including Leonard, started noticing the small shifts around, as well as changes within him. The association of the shelter started to change the way they treated him. Praises and practical assistance had been non-existent for him throughout the years. They encouraged him, telling him that his story wasn't over. His journey started getting some attention from the people that had gone through the shelter and were also going through similar pain. Approached him, motivated by his readiness to initiate. If you're able to do it, why can't I? Someone expressed while encouraging Leonard with a "look how far you have come" gesture. The action, uncomplicated as it was to Leonard, instilled for the first time an unknown form of pride. However, outside the shelter, there ceased to be silence over Leonard's story. The film showing his meeting with Barron Trump went viral on all social media platforms, earning over 1 million views within days. Of course, the news made a big deal about it. Explaining what they found in the image, the commentators argued over every little thing. For you see, Barron's performed an act, or rather a stunt, that many are divided online, while viewers around the country shared their sentiments online. With a purpose of self-serving, privilege was the buzzword, admit the threads. "This is how you use it for good," another user posted. "It is rather disheartening to see an act as kind as this is so seldom practiced. But Barron has manages to shock us all, so thank you for that." It is possible. Lerner learned about the attention when a staff member at the shelter showed him the video. Watching himself on screen, Leonard felt a strange mix of emotions: embarrassment, gratitude, and something he couldn't quite name. His eyes were devoid of hope, his stance was shredded, and together made him feel like a reminder of how low he is and how much he can rise if he wishes to. Yet Barron's intentions are still questionable. Why Barron behaved like this, to no interviews, statements out there, and then going on to explain why, was not the focus of my point. Praising words was not the Leonard, but an ingrate and Barron had something common. With a promise that is all proclaimed by the actions in the dark, Barron made the shelter receive enough donations to expand his programs and help even more people like Leonard. The video sparked a larger movement, tagging them with hashtags like #KindnessChallenge and intercardinal social movements locally. Charitable contributions increased, and so did volunteerism. Volunteers emerged in great numbers. Scott Barron motivated Leonard, who resolved to take more drastic measures towards his health one day. While sitting at the communal area of the shelter, he noticed a guy sitting across from him who had always seemed familiar. "Leonard," said the man, a bit uncertain. "I know where I've seen you," said Leonard, while trying to match the face with a name. A minute later, everything fell into place. "Yes, Paul," he said, experiencing tremors in his voice. It was clear now that this was the younger brother that he had not spoken to for almost a decade. For a moment, both men stood and gazed at each other. The weight of what they had missed out on hung over their heads. As he sank down next to Leonard, Paul said, "I did see the video. I did not have any idea that things were so low for you. I should have contacted you a long time ago." Slowly, Leonard shook his head, attempting to suppress his tears. "There is nothing to be ashamed of. I surely did not help anyone approach me for assistance." He put a hand on Sasha's shoulder. "But today I am here, and you have my full attention." Elaine did manage to escape, and her father recognized the worst. Paul did not stand a chance. To Leonard, it was another advancement towards self-recovery, not just his situation, but the man's relationships, as well as how he viewed himself. And through the passing weeks, Leonard began to reinterpret his narrative not as a tragedy, but rather as a tale of unwavering willpower. The journey, however, was a long one. Still, he carried with himself a reinvigorated sense of meaning in life, and all because of the kindness that had been shown to him by a stranger. He had paid him much more than mere dollars and cents. He had restored his faith.